Mansfield!
So it seems around 25 years ago, a situation similar to this one made me fall off my chair.
Containing system error.
Facehuggers, jumping out from nowhere. One-hit kills, absolute gits of the highest order. I love Aliens vs Predator in a way I do few other games. By that I don't mean Alien vs Predator, or Alien vs Predator, not Alien vs Predator, or even Alien vs Predator. No, my love is solely for the Aliens vs Predator created by Oxford-based Rebellion Developments. Oh, and by that I do not mean Aliens vs Predator. No, the 25-year-old Aliens vs Predator, first released in 1999 on PC and these days confusingly titled Aliens vs Predator Classic 2000. That's the one, we got there! It's a weird one though, because objectively speaking, AVP-99 was, and always has been, a game that felt slapped together, held in one piece by straining duct tape, and featured a mishmash of ideas that never really coalesced into a pure focused whole. If I were to don my reviewer's beret, for old time's sake, and talk about the thoroughly disjointed feel of this first-person shooter/slasher, were I to raise issue with its sometimes obnoxious level of difficulty, if I were to point my freshly sharpened ire gland in the direction of AVP-99's almost amateurish clunkiness in its moment-to-moment play, well, it'd be fair for you, dear reader, to think this were a game to avoid. But AVP's Party Like It's 1999 doesn't sit in that part of my brain, and when you look at contemporaneous reviews, it didn't hit like that back in the day either. It was instantly hailed as something of a classic, at least in some quarters. PC Gamer in the UK lobbed 90% the game's way and described it as tough as a tough thing. Perennial competitor Mag PC Zone went a bit further and awarded 91%. Games Master, 94%. GamePro, 6.5. Oh wait, GameSpot threw an 8.3 at AVP-99, describing it as a one-trick pony, but that one trick is more than adequate to carry an entire game. And given that was written by Half-Life 2, Psychonauts, Portal 2, and Old Man Murray alumnus Eric Wolpaw, you know you can trust it. The game didn't see universal praise, but it did largely strike a chord as a heady mix of atmosphere, intensity, and terror that simultaneously paid homage to two titans of sci-fi cinema. And the Colonial Marines, I guess. And yet, I stand by what I said. On paper, this just shouldn't have worked. Fortunately, AVP wasn't made in 1952, so it wasn't set on paper. It was a video game. One you played with your hands and fingers and thumbs and eyes and ears, and using all or some of those bits in concert, you were able to dig beyond the relatively awkward surface of the game and find that actually there was something deeper at play here. It all began with the design concept Rebellion itself had brought to the table with Alien vs Predator, one of the different ones, in 1994 on the Atari Jaguar. You could play as an alien, you could play as a predator, and you could play as a meatbag, aka a human colonial marine. From this starting point, one which made a lot of sense considering the idea of the game, its setting, all that stuff, AVP-99 essentially gave you three different games in one. The depth, she deepens. The Marine campaign hit the most traditional FPS notes, your gun arm ever facing forward as you navigated a maze of switches and doors and more switches and ceaselessly flashing lights, but this was a take on the then traditional FPS with a couple of spins on the formula. From the obscene darkness on show, or not on show as the case may be, to the utter pathetic weakness of the flashbag you were playing as who would move from dying to dead in the space of about 0.5 seconds of flailing in the blackness, and the fact that outside of when you held both the minigun and some ammunition for it, you always felt underpowered and overwhelmed. It all made for a game that toyed with our expectations of what an FPS should be in the late 90s, and AVP didn't even rip off Half-Life to achieve that. Stepping into the Predator's shoes, they don't wear shoes, was a whole other feeling. Specifically, a feeling of power. You could die, you would die. Sometimes even when cloaked, Marines would see you from the other side of a massive room and pick you off with a well-aimed grenade shot. But putting the human and Predator experience side by side, the differences were vast. As Captain Dreadlock, you were now the hunter. You were the one with the wide selection of killing devices from the off. You could hide better and see your enemies easier. You were the one of the two who was able to heal themselves at will, extraterrestrial Duracell charge permitting. The game went from a feeling of backpedaling terror and constant near-insta-death to one where you could be on the front foot, advance and, in the most part, dominate levels. Which makes it little surprise the Predator was my favourite of the beings to play as. But that never meant things were easy, and there was still the chance to fall prey to the classic AVP one-hit kills, especially if you weren't paying close attention to any facehuggers in the area. Your Xenomorph sessions were yet another whole other thing, and while playing as Giga's Wet Dream meant you didn't have to worry about facehugger insta-kills, you did still have to worry about pretty much anything else able to cause you damage. They might be the perfect killing organism, but your aliens from Alien have always been a wee bit vulnerable to bullets, Molotov cocktails, and plasma blasts. Your ability to stick to practically any surface combined with the sort of pacey movement that you simply have to describe as pacey movement acted as two fine forms of defense, while also offering gargantuan bouts of motion sickness and vertigo. Additionally, the fact you could eviscerate most enemies in your way with a few flails of the claw and whips of the tail, or just eating their faces off, meant your Xeno travails were also backed up with the tools of aggression needed to get the job done, if the job was killing and not shelf stacking at least. I really don't think I've played a game that nailed the feeling of being the Xenomorph better than AVP-99. Its mix of utter lethality, absolute fragility, and world-whirling navigation, to me, perfectly encapsulated what the clambering penis head of death should handle like. I don't know, maybe it's quaint today. Maybe it elicits a big pile of "so what, Grandad?" before the super rad youngsters watching this go ollie off a TikTok. But back in the ancient past of 1999, this was near unheard of variety of play in a first-person shooter. Even the bar raisers and genre shifters like Half-Life, released in late 1998, didn't mix up the actual style of play that much as you went through things. AVP felt fresh, invigorating, unique. And so once you'd been drawn in enough for that relative complexity to make itself known, once AVP-99 had its claws, whipping tail and snapping jaws in you, that's when the game pulled its most important trick, scaring the ever-loving bejeebus out of you. Because when you'd become acclimatized to the shantytown feel of the game and allowed yourself to settle in and see the greatness resting just below the surface, you would become engaged. You'd be focused. You'd be the person sitting at their PC mere inches away from the screen, headphones firmly lodged over your sizable noggin, taking in every single flashing light, steaming valve, and bleep from your motion tracker before. And that's why you'd fall off your chair. Rebellion's second AVP also landed in something of a tipping point for FPS games as a whole. By its launch in 1999, we'd already seen Half-Life and would soon get Quake 3 Arena. We knew which way the genre was going. Single-player games were heading away from being breakneck-paced corridor shooters, with that pacier approach firmly entrenched as a core facet of competitive multiplayer titles. Single-player games were becoming more cinematic. There was an ever-increasing focus on cutscenes and narratives driving the whole experience along. Games in general were becoming that bit more welcoming to those who didn't have the elite skills to get good, or whatever the lingo I'm supposed to use is. Now, Aliens vs Predator did feature a very enjoyable online mode, something a lot of players swear by and something that is actually the defining feature of the game for many looking back with a nostalgic eye. But to me, it's always been a single-player title first and foremost, and that's where it showed itself to be landing at an awkward time and straddling a gap in taste and design when it came to first-person shooters. AVP maintained the breakneck pace of Doom, Quake, and other 90s shooters. Most of the action took place in corridors, cramped or otherwise. While it leaned on an atmosphere and a cinematic flair, there were no Clockwork Orange-style attempts to force you to sit through the developer's interpretation of the mixed lore of the Xenomorphs and the Yautja. You could walk straight past the game's version of cutscenes, or blow up the monitors, or if you wanted, you could stand and watch some bland, formulaic FMV sequences of bored-looking low-level actors forcing their way through a functional script. Or, of course, you could play the updated version that Rebellion threw out a bit after the game first launched, which replaced all the FMVs with new ones created in-house by the devs themselves. And, in fact, you should do that and not be tempted to mod these videos out of the game, as some might say you should, because they're on a par with The Room for sheer can't-turn-away badness. And, of course, AVP-99 immediately landed itself a big old slice of notoriety by being absolutely, completely, and totally unwelcoming to newcomers. Or to old hands, really. It was a game that didn't particularly care about balance and fairness, instead offering to throw unknowable dangers in your way that could kill you in one hit, or at least very quickly, alongside a punitive system of not allowing saves during levels. Yes, this was patched out soon after launch, and these days you can allow unlimited saves if you want to be a regular low-level coward of a player. But I played AVP when it first came out, pre-patch, and I got all the way to level 2 before I couldn't make any further progress without saves. Get good! Like I say, this was a game that felt like it was barely held together with duct tape. It seemingly missed all the cues from the wider industry on where the genre was heading as a whole, and it cared little for the actual enjoyment of the player. And it was phenomenal for all of those reasons. AVP-99's direct sequel went to a new developer, Monolith, and it's a game that still has plenty of fans bleating positives about it to this day. I'll admit AVP2 did always feel like a more coherent game with an actual storyline you could follow, a triple narrative that offered moments of crossover between each, and a generally more put-together feel to things. Certainly not the scrappy, jury-rigged feel of the pre-millennium PC game. But AVP2 isn't my favourite, and Rebellion's return to AVP in 2010 isn't even a game I'd say I particularly like. No, the eternal champion in my mind has always been 1999's Aliens vs. Predator, the game that made me fall off a chair. How many other games have done that? None. Exactly. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to my patrons on Patreon who would never knowingly knock me off a chair, I hope. You can join them via the link below, and I've switched on YouTube memberships too, cause why the hell not, eh? I'm off to reenact all those FMV cutscenes while breaking out my finest American accent. Bye!